Hola muchachas, empezamos a hablar del pretérito con un meme, como siempre. Dice que bueno que llegaste, el sofá explotó, as if he's not totally the one who exploded the sofa. But two preterite verbs, right? We have llegaste in the to form, explotó in the LA form. Bien. Ok, vamos a hablar del pretérito. Vamos a repasar la gramática del pretérito. So the preterite is used in the past tense, used to talk about already completed actions or events. For example, yesterday I went to the store, I bought a Sprite, but I spilled it on the floor. All of those are like the preterite tense in English. So one-time events, a sequence of things that happened in the past that are completed. So we have laugh in the present tense becomes laughed in the preterite. Smile becomes smiled in the preterite in English. So that ed ending is often the preterite. So for your regular verbs, we have the same pattern as always for conjugation. You need to figure out what the stem is and what the ending is. You find the stem by dropping the last letters of the infinitive, right? So the first part of the verb is considered your stem. So for hablar, that H-A-B-L would be the stem. Taking you back to the beginning of conjugating, right? And then you'd add the appropriate preterite tense ending. So for you make sure that you know whether it's an AR, ER, or IR verb, and then you think about what pronoun, who's doing the action, who do you want to conjugate for. How do you find out if it's AR, ER, IR? You look at those last two letters, right? Hablar, AR verb, comer is an ER verb, vivir is an IR verb. All right, and then you want to figure out who's doing the talking, who the verb is about. So yo, tú, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes, so that you can decide how to conjugate the verb, who to conjugate it for. And then finally, the most important part, right? These are your preterite AR verb endings. And if you're taking notes, you would want to stop the video and take notes on this slide. This is important to remember. So the yo form ends with e, with an accent. Tú, haste, él, ella, o. Nosotros hamos, vosotros hasteis. And ellos harán. Something to think about for the vosotros form. You won't ever have to produce the vosotros form, but it's good to take note of so that you can understand it. You see the to form is haste. Check out the vosotros. It has that same haste, and then it adds that is ending, and that's true for all of the preterite endings in of the vosotros form. Yeah. So for our verb hablar, then we have yo hablé, tú hablaste, él habló, nosotros hablamos, vosotros hablasteis, ustedes hablaron. Ayer hablé con mis amigos por teléfono. Mirar, yo miré, tú miraste, él miró, nosotros miramos, vosotros mirasteis, y ellas miraron. An example sentence, anteayer, day before yesterday, miré la televisión por 3 horas. Preterite ER verb endings are very similar, but with the different vowels. So yo with the I, tú, iste, ella, y yo. Notice that the accent is on that O. That's important. A lot of people get it confused and put it on the I. And nosotros imos, vosotros istes, and ellas hieron. And to put that on a verb like comer, it looks like this. Yo comí, tú comiste, él comió. Nosotros comimos, vosotros comisteis, ustedes comieron. Example sentence, anoche, last night, tú comiste 5 tacos. Preterite IR verb endings are exactly the same as the ER verb endings. And so for an IR verb, it looks like this, just like comer, right? So yo viví, tú viviste, él vivió, nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivisteis, and ellas vivieron. A note about pronouncing this verb, vivir, it should sound like a B, right? That B and V in Spanish are the same phonetical sound, so vivir. El año pasado, mis abuelos vivieron en una casa verde. All right, and then you should pause the screen right here and go ahead and try out these verbs of these sentences. It gives you the verb in parentheses. You conjugate and put it into those sentences, making sure you know who you're conjugating for and then choosing the right form of the verb. All right, muchachos, ready, go. All right, and then let's go over some of those answers. So for number 1, escucho. I'm just going to go ahead and show you all of them so you can check your work. Okay. And a little bit more practice. Again, pause the video, practice if you need this extra practice. And then here are the answers. Oh, a little bit hard to read on a couple, my apologies. You might notice this verb here, lavar. One mistake I notice a lot of people are making is they'll put two L's at the beginning, and they'll say llevar, which is not actually a verb. We have llevar with the two L's, to carry or to wear, and lavar with one L to wash. Alright, muchachos. So let's talk about some words that are commonly used with the preterite. So often when you see these words, they function kind of as a trigger, so you know you should use the preterite. So if this is hoy, right? If hoy is lunes, then ayer would be domingo, the day before. Anoche, last night. Anteayer, the night before. Sorry, the day before, yesterday. And el martes pasado, we could say el miércoles pasado, el jueves pasado, la semana pasada, etc. So a couple of those more. El año pasado, last year. La semana pasada, last week. El fin de semana pasado, last weekend. And notice, because this is feminine, la semana, then we want pasada. Because this is masculine, el fin de semana, we want pasado. Oh, I'm sorry. The English for those? Alright, a couple other common trigger words for the preterite. We have de repente, suddenly, desde, this time, hasta, this time. That from and until means that it's a completed action. Una vez, once or one time. Dos veces, even if it was like 20 veces, like 20 times, that implies that it only happened those times and then was done, and you would need the preterite. More on that. And then ya, already. There is this great song on SoundCloud. It's a cover of Wide Awake in Español. You could check that out. You could just search on SoundCloud for that cover called Hoy Desperté if you want to hear more Español in the preterite. All right, and so let's talk about some irregulars. So we have cargar verbs. Remember, these are verbs that need a spelling change to keep the pronunciation the same. So if a verb ends in car, right, in the preterite yo form, that C turns into a QU. If a verb ends in gar, in the preterite yo form, the G turns into a GU. If the verb ends in zar, in the preterite yo form, the Z turns into a C. So if a stem ends in the letters C, G, or Z, that means it's a cargar verb. Those letters will change in which form? This is important. They don't change everywhere, right? The spelling only changes in the yo form. All right, so it has that irregular yo form. It's just a summary slide, right? So the C turns into a QU, so sacar becomes sake. And the reason you're making this change again is so that the pronunciation sounds like the verb originally did. So sacar with that k sound. If we don't change the spelling and we leave it as a C, you would actually pronounce it sase, which doesn't make any sense, is not actually a verb, doesn't sound like the verb we want it to. And so you are changing the spelling to keep the sound the same, is the whole point of it. This will be important in what we're going to learn first as a new topic in Spanish 3. The subjunctive will have this spelling change, and so you really want to take note of this. Cargars are, and then these specific spelling changes in the preterite yo form. So an example of the whole verb, we have buscar, and then busqué, buscaste, buscó, nosotros buscamos, vosotros buscastes, and ellos buscaron. Again, if we did not change the spelling, we would have to pronounce it as bucé, which actually means that like you snorkeled, which is not what you want to say. Busqué with the spelling change. It lets you keep that pronunciation, and then it sounds like you looked for. All right, ayer yo busqué a mis amigos. Yesterday I looked for my friends. And then another kind of irregular verbs, we have creer, leer, oír. Irregular verbs. The preterite forms are irregular for creer, leer, and oír, and it's just another spelling change. So creer, to believe, looks like this. Leer looks like this. So what is changing, if you notice, what is changing is just this Y down here, and we can call this the slipper, right? So not like a boot verb, it's a slipper verb. Down here in the el, ella, and the ellos forms, it gets a Y. Same thing for leer and oír. Down here in the slipper, the spelling changes to a Y. Anoche el monstruo leyó un libro en español. So we have that spelling change because it's an LA form. For preterite hacer, we have a couple that are just super irregular, right? Hice, hiciste, hizo. One other spelling change here. It's kind of the backwards of a cargazar, right? Hizo. Nosotros hicimos, vosotros hicisteis, ellos hicieron. ¿Qué hiciste ayer? You're going to hear this question a lot, right? Ayer hice mi tarea de español. And the preterite ir, fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuistes, fueron. Super irregular, right? Like ir usually is. El verano pasado mi familia y yo fuimos a la playa. We went to the beach. Preterite ser. So what do you notice, right? This is exactly the same conjugations between ir and ser. So yo fui, tú fuiste, ella fue. So it's going to be really important. It's going to be really important to take note of the context to know which verb is being used because they have the same conjugations. All right, another little bit of practice. You can take a moment, pause the video, fill in those blanks with the correct preterite verbs. And here are your answers, so you can double check. Oh, sorry muchachos, that should be bailaron with that N up here with that, bailaron. Another bit of practice, go ahead and pause. And here are your answers. And again, a little more. So, answers in a weird order. Just practicing that normal verb endings and then those ones that have this stem change, the spelling change. Alright, ¿qué hiciste ayer, muchachos? This is a question you should be able to answer in español. And you would do that by using your preterite verbs to answer. So another way to practice, go ahead and write 5 sentences about your activities yesterday. Using at least one with the verb ir, because that's one you would use a lot. And if we were in class, you would ask a partner. And you would share out with a partner. ¿Qué hiciste ayer? ¿Qué hizo ayer tu compañero? That's spelling that conjugation change for the LA form. Alright, muchachos. Ya es todo para el pretérito. There will be another video that talks about those irregular preterite verbs. Remember from the song, tener estuve, estar estuve. There'll be another slide about that. There'll also be a video about when to choose the preterite versus the imperfect. Alright, muchachos. Adiós.